You're watching Talking Points, a focus on the political scene in Lubbock and across the South Plains.
Welcome back. Decades in the making, I-27 is now designated as a future federal interstate highway. It's projected to span from north of Amarillo all the way down to Laredo, and it'll create Texas's second north-south interstate, projected to transport billions of economic activity into and out of West Texas. Joining us now is Senator Ted Cruz, who's been working to secure this designation in the U.S. Senate. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Ryan, great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So this is a development for Interstate 27 that has been in the works for really decades and has been a real need that we've had in West Texas. Why has it taken so long for the federal government to acknowledge this, and how did it cross the finish line this year?
Well, it was a tremendous victory we saw this year, and you're right, it's the result of decades of hard work. And several years ago, leaders from West Texas came to me and met with me in the Capitol and asked if I would lead the fight to try to get the Ports to Plains Highway authorized and move forward towards constructing it. And I accepted that request and introduced legislation to do exactly that. I brought along with me Senator John Cornyn from Texas and also Senator Kevin Cramer from North Dakota, and began working to build the coalition of both Republicans and Democrats it would take to move this forward in the Senate. Earlier this year, when we had the infrastructure bill before the Senate, I had two major amendments I took the lead on, both focused on West Texas. One was the Cruz-Warnock amendment. That was for I-14, which runs from the Permian Basin all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. And that amendment, we got bipartisan support. It passed overwhelmingly. It passed unanimously, passed into law, helping bring oil and gas and crops all the way east to the Atlantic Ocean. The second, the Ports to Plains, which will run from Laredo all the way north through Lubbock, all the way up into North Dakota and even Canada above that. We likewise got bipartisan support for it. The amendment was the Cruz-Lujan amendment, Lujan being the Democrat senator from New Mexico. And we had agreement to move forward on that until at the last minute on the infrastructure bill, there was an unrelated dispute between Bernie Sanders, a Democrat, and Richard Shelby, a Republican. That unrelated dispute stopped all of the amendments. But the good news, Ryan, is the agreement that we had built on Cruz-Lujan, the fact that we had gotten both sides to sign off, that we brought on Democrats and Republicans, enabled us to get it passed in a subsequent bill shortly thereafter. The long and short of it is we did the hard work to bring together Democrats and Republicans, and we now have designated I-27, the Ports to Plains, to run from Laredo all the way north through Lubbock, all the way up to Canada. That is going to bring jobs, $55 billion project. You're talking hundreds of thousands of jobs. You're talking tens of billions of dollars of additional GDP to the state of Texas. And it's a great bipartisan victory for the state of Texas.
It's the kind of local impacting bipartisan bill that we don't see often from the U.S. Senate especially, but that's exactly the kind of legislation we like to talk about. I will ask you, though, you were in Lubbock last week, I believe, announcing this. We had some questions for our community as to why you had voted against the appropriations bill that actually gave this designation. Why shepherd this federal highway designation through the process and then end up voting against the actual legislation that put it into law?
Well, listen, that happens frequently in the United States Senate, where you end up working to get agreement and to pass a particular piece of legislation, but then it gets rolled into a giant bill that has a whole bunch of good things and bad things. And for a decade now, there have been dozens of different pieces of legislation that I wrote, that I got support for, that I got passed into law, but the ultimate vehicle that they got stuck into had other elements that were bad and wasteful and didn't make sense, so that I vote against the giant mess of a bill, but at the same time enact the legislative victory that's focused on jobs in the state of Texas. And the reason for that is simple. My priority is jobs, and I can tell you on the infrastructure bill, I was very directly focused on West Texas, which is why we had two big victories for West Texas, I-14 and I-27, both enacted into law.
That infrastructure bill, I do want to ask you about that too, because when we look at its impact for Texas, it's giving $35 billion to the state of Texas, 26 of which is for federal highway projects, $100 million for broadband, $53 million for wildfire prevention. We love all of those things, especially here in West Texas. That was also a no vote for you, though. What were your concerns on the broader infrastructure bill, even with all of the benefits that it seemingly gives for us here in West Texas?
Look, it's really simple, which is Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi have been spending wildly and irresponsibly. They've spent trillions of dollars. We've racked up trillions in new debt. We're printing money we don't have. And the raging inflation that we're seeing in Lubbock and across West Texas and across the state and across the country is the direct result of Democrats spending trillions of dollars we don't have. The reason why the cost of food has skyrocketed, the cost of rent has skyrocketed, the cost of lumber has skyrocketed, the cost of electricity and healthcare and everything we spend money on, and especially the cost of gasoline, has more than doubled in just a year and a half under Joe Biden. And it's the wantonly irresponsible spending from the Democrats, trillions and trillions of dollars. And, you know, it's interesting you focused on hard infrastructure, things like roads and bridges. A very small percentage of that so-called infrastructure bill was actually roads and bridges. I emphatically support roads and bridges, and indeed was leading the fight to bring roads and bridges to Texas and West Texas in particular. But what the Democrats do, because everybody likes roads and bridges, they sell that small portion of the bill, and they cram the bill through all sorts of unrelated spending that is paying off left-wing special interest. And if you don't like the inflation you're paying when you fill up your tank, it is because the Democrats cannot exercise fiscal restraint, and their answer is spend trillions and trillions more, and that is hurting working Americans all across the state of Texas.
We have to take a quick break now. When we come back, we'll switch gears with Senator Cruz to talk about student loans and abortion rights.